Okay, in this video we will be putting wheel bearings in the rear hubs of a Rolls-Royce Phantom 1. This particular car is a Springfield Phantom 1. This would be the same, I would say almost exactly as what you would find with a British Phantom 1 and even the later Silver Ghosts. So we have everything all cleaned up. Give you a little look at what it's like down in the bore there where the bearings go. Hopefully you can see in there okay. So we take our first bearing, what I'll refer to as the outer bearing, and this is a brand new one, a sealed bearing. We went with that in order to prevent some of the grease and stuff from migrating onto the brake shoes, which has happened after many years with the other original bearings. So we drop this down in place. We get it squarely positioned down there. Make sure it's good and square. And I normally set it in place by tapping. I use a hardened steel punch. You don't want to use brass or aluminum because that could send a little splinter into the bearing, and you don't want that. So I just normally tap it down in place with this. I suppose you could use a press as well if you have a big enough of a press to get it into, but again I just prefer tapping it down in place. Of course, you want to be careful that you don't slip and end up going right against the seal or damaging the ball cage or any of the ball bearings. I think we're probably there. We are all the way in. Now the next item that goes in is this spacer. This is the small end, that's the big end, and the flange goes to the top, so it goes in down this way. So I'll put some gloves on. They recommend in the service instruction sheets to coat the outside of this spacer with grease. And so if you're going to use the original bearings, or if you're going to use open cage bearings, you want to use a high temperature disc brake grease, which will hold up much better than anything else. This is the stuff I like to use. So yeah, so now they recommend for some reason to put a coating of grease on the outside of that. Drop that in place.
Call from Darrell Crook.
Put a little
Call from
grease
Darrell
up
Crook.
in here for the sake of it. Maybe a little bit. Okay. Okay. Now we take our inner bearing, which is larger than the last one, and get that in place. Make sure you start it square. And again, tap it in on the outer race. And you'll feel the hammer bounce back when you have the bearing seated in all the way. That's how you know it's in. Then we take our red fiber washer that goes in there. A little grease on it as well. What I'll do is just put it around here. That in place. And we have our retaining nut that goes on, which is threaded, and you can see the, so I can get it up in the camera here, on, off. Put a little on the thread, just for the help ease in the. Okay. Thread this guy on. Okay. Just have a little extra grease here I want to wipe off. Don't want any of that getting on the brakes or brake shoes. Then we have our special serrated spanner for tightening and loosening these. And we want to tighten it up to align with these two studs. I can get it in there where you can see it. Right here, two studs. So that we can put our locking plate back in place. Which makes sure to keep that serrated ring in place. I'm going to need to secure it in the vise. It's spinning away from me. Let the padded jaw go. Use this one for now. Okay. And jaw in place so we don't mar up the any. Tighten things up. Doesn't have to be super tight. I'll bring this in closer. See what's going on. Let's see here. Maybe I'll spin this so you can see what we're trying to line up there. Look. this guy up. So it's going to line up to get that lock on. Okay. We got it. So let me give this a little wire brush quickly. Here's our lock. Goes on like such. It looks like it's been mauled about a little bit. I see a burr on the edge there that's interfering. There it goes. Right in place like such. And then we put 2 little lock washers, number 10 lock washers. We put the nuts on. Nuts, and then we tighten them up. And once we have these tightened, and this rear brake drum hub assembly is ready to go on the car. Once everything's ready for the car to accept it. All right. So there we have it. Ready to go in the car. Okay, so now we're going to install the front hub bearings in this Springfield Phantom 1 hub. So the first item to go in is this piece, which is a spacer, and it also helps to extract the bearing since you don't have any other way to get around to either side of it. And it goes in with the flat portion down like that. We put our new bearing in place, a sealed bearing. And again, I normally just sort of tap them down in. once you feel the hammer bounce back, then you know it's seated all the way down. And we turn the hub upside down, or the other way around. Ooh. Dust we need to blow out of there, right? Okay, good. So we have our red fiber washer, which has already been dropped into place. So the next item to go in is the aluminum spacer. And again, this spacer gets coated with grease, as we did with the rear, which is a recommendation from the service instruction sheets. I don't know exactly why they tell you to do it, but I'm sure they figured out that it was an important thing to do. And we want to use a high temperature disc brake grease. I find works the best, a good, very good grade of grease. You'll find that if the grease has not been cleaned out and changed for many years, that grease is probably broken down and liquefied, and can very easily find its way out to the brake shoes and into the drum and cause braking issues. Whereas I find that the good quality disc brake grease takes considerably more time to break down. So we give it a good coating. You can be pretty liberal with it. We drop it in, small in first, and make sure it comes into contact with that plate that is that steel plate. So next is the roller bearing, the inner roller bearing. So, and it also needs a good liberal amount of grease on it. As you notice, the ball bearing that's on the outer portion is new and it's sealed. And this is the original roller bearing. I prefer to use the original roller bearings. I think that they are much better quality than anything you're going to get these days, if it's in good shape. And it's a roller bearing because it has to take a considerable amount of load. And roller bearings are better at taking load than ball bearings. We goop on the grease. And we drop this guy back in where she came from. Has a rule, I normally, if there's any numbers, markings or anything on one side and not the other, then I usually put the markings out where they can be seen. I'm gonna get this guy set in. Gotta tap it down in lightly enough to align it, and then it'll go right on in. center race should go up against the aluminum spacer. And we just work the grease down in to the rollers. Hands a little wet. So now we have a retaining ring that goes in place, which is this fella. At some point in time, somebody had beat on it a little bit with probably punches and the hammer and to try to remove it. So this is the passenger side hub, and this retainer is right-hand threaded. On the driver's side, it's left-hand threaded. So then we take our tool that fits into the retainer notches. Seat it in a little bit more. Slip it. Thread this guy in. Somebody at one time or another had put a marking on here, which is very helpful for aligning the locking wire. So I don't know if you can see in there or not, but there's a little mark somebody left, and then there's a mark on the retainer. So we tighten this down and align those marks, and then that'll align the holes. Doesn't have to be incredibly tight. Just tight enough. Just got it up. Got the marks lined up. There. Let me see if it's going to go in. Something just to double check. You'll use a little probe or something to make sure your hole's lined up, and it sure is. So we should be able to snap that ring in there. In it goes. Like such. And sometimes you need to tap it a little bit to seat it in. Like so. Of course, you don't need a punch this big, but all right. Switch all in. Paper there. So then we take what grease is coming out and we work it into this felt seal that's in here. So I'll give you another little look at this tool. So we have our 4 teeth there that align into the 4 openings or serrations in the retainer, and that's what you use to wind it on, wind it off. At times people put those in incredibly tight, or they can rust in place. So that's why it's always good to use the proper tool to break it loose and take it out. So there you have it. So now this hub drum assembly with the new bearing and the cleaned up roller bearing and everything is greased, and it's all ready to go onto the car.